So here we are going live on YouTube, and welcome everybody. We got Bruce Rawles, Lynn Johnson, we got Glory in here, and so here we go. And we're reading the book Absence from Felicity by Dr. Kenneth Wapnick, PhD. So let me get this up on the screen. And here we are. So I think we start here on the next part is what I think.
The
But we can.
next part. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So you want to read?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah, this is Absence from Felicity, the story of Helen Schuckman and her scrubbing of A Course in Miracles. And we are on your screen at page 252 of 492 at 50%. We're halfway through. And I've got us on page 259, the first paragraph, first full paragraph, which I will read, as you pointed out, starts with, the next part of this course rests too heavily on the earlier part not to require its study. Actually, why don't I back up a paragraph, because this is actually a quoted portion from, it says, we pick up this reference after which Jesus returns to his exhortation to Helen and Bill to study this material. Okay, so as Ken points out, yes, it's experiential and you need to do the workbook, but you never should get too far away from the pure non-dual metaphysics of the course. So I think that's why it helps to not keep our nose in a book, but keep our mind in the meaning behind the book, if that makes sense. And really,
Yes, and
oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry. You just made me think of something that somebody said the other day that I realized is not so clear because we were reading the course and we do these deep dive like we're doing here with this book, and they said, "Well, you're missing the content because you're not just reading it straight through." And so you're missing the content, and um, uh, you're only doing the form. And I thought it's the opposite way. We're we're getting the content, even though the form is written in a language that most of us barely understand. So we're digging for content here, not for more form. Anyway, sorry to
Yeah, yeah.
interrupt you.
No, that's a really important point. I mean, and the content really is the awareness in our mind that we attempted to describe in words, but and one attempt might be the understanding that uh, God's children are innocent, and tag, we're all it. We all seem to be separate selves, but there's really just one of us dreaming that we pulled off this impossible crime of separation, and because it's impossible, guilt is a forgivable and absurd notion that we can look at in all of its various forms and just say, oh, well, that's silly, I could forgive that. But it takes a while for us to come around to that realization. So anyway, so
Absolutely. Okay, continue. I'm sorry.
oh, no, that's fine, that's fine. I mean, all helpful stuff. And so this is basically Jesus returning to his exhortation to Helen Bill to study this material. And then now we're quoting from Helen's channel material, which is actually Jesus talking, I believe. Okay, this produces the, quote, pseudo retardation syndrome, unquote, which is justly classified as a psychiatric, and then in parentheses, or disturbed level, close parentheses, symptom. Both of you do this all the time. Bill acts as if he does not understand even his own special language, let alone mine, and you cannot read at all. This represents a joint attack on both yourselves and me, because it renders your mind weak and mine, M-I-N-E, incompetent. Remember, this puts you in a truly fearful position. If you cannot understand either your own mind or mine, that's M-I-N-E again, with capital M, you do not know what is really willed. It is thus impossible to avoid conflict as defined before, because even if you act according to will, you wouldn't know it. So wow, there's a lot in that. Just one of the things that jumps out at me is that that when we put ourselves in a fearful position, we oftentimes do that by discounting the credibility and the authority of not only what we read in the course, just through the ego mind, which doubts anything that's unchanging, because it only has a reference to what changes, and therefore the impermanent, aka personalities, bodies, planets, galaxies, atoms, all that stuff that comes and goes, is the only thing that we think is real, and yet we know, on at least on some deep level, that sooner or later all of this material stuff will cease to seem to be, and at some point, we made it up, even though those are too far out of the reach of our conscious awareness. But there's a part of our mind that I think understands that this is just a giant charade. It's just a big puppet show, and we've identified with one of countless puppets, and yet the puppeteer in our mind is really what we need to keep looking for, because which is what the Holy Spirit represents, right? Anyway, I'm kind of rambling a little bit, but hopefully that
Well,
was
no,
relevant.
I think that's really good, and I'm glad you went back there because this gives us another chance to hang on here. Let me fix the mic and pop up. It gives us the chance to again see Jesus's wit and sense of humor, because
That
here
too,
he
yeah.
says that both of you do this all the time. Bill acts as if he does not understand even his own special language, let alone mine, and you cannot read at all. I
All
mean,
the various ways that we defend ourselves, each of us with a seemingly unique set of defenses, but all that they really do is just keep peace from our awareness, which is needless suffering, as the course says, this need not be, right?
exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. He says this represents a joint attack on both yourselves and me because it renders your mind weak and mine incompetent.
pretty crazy. I'm glad we backed up on and cover this paragraph, because I know we read it last week, but it was right at the end of our hour, and I think it deserved a little more
It does. It
study
does.
and examination. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, because I mean this is he's just hitting it right on the bottom line. If you can't understand either your own mind or mine, you do not know what is really willed. It's thus impossible to avoid conflict,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because even if you act according to will, you wouldn't know it. Even if you were doing it, you wouldn't know it, because you don't even know. I don't know the thing I am. I don't know anything about my own mind.
Right.
And I just love that he points this out so clearly and so succinctly. And
Yeah.
again, with that tongue in cheek, like,
But I was thinking, if we try to act on our own, we're sort of idling. And I was thinking, a stopped clock is at least right twice a day. It's even though it's not doing what it was designed to do. But we occasionally will stumble across something that reflects the truth, but because we're doing it out of a desire to avoid the truth, it really doesn't mean anything for us. um, and so it's only when we recognize that there is an identity that does have meaning, unlike the one that we made up, the identity we made up, that we'll be willing to question the little puppet, um, characters, the dream figures that we're so enamored with, and we think are so special. And if we can just, gently, non-derisively giggle and laugh at our identification with that, and just say, well, yeah, of course it's impossible to avoid conflict, because I'm basing my whole identity on the teacher of conflict, whose very premise is duality or conflict. And so how could I not have an experience of conflict if I'm not even questioning the very foundation of my thought system, right?
right. And the whole
Yeah.
purpose of all of it is to be looking for differences. This is all the ego wants to do, is point out the differences
Right.
between us and them, this and that, like all these different things. And when we're focusing on those differences, then we can't help but compare better or worse. And that's what today's lesson, Love is the Way I Act, Walk in Gratitude, is talking about. We're just so full of comparison of this is better than that. I'm smarter than you. You're smarter than me. You're richer than me. I mean, that's, you can't have gratitude when you're living in comparison.
Love
So,
makes no comparisons, huh?
yeah.
Yep.
So this is, really, wow, beautiful. I love this. All right, I'll let you continue reading.
Okay. Okay. Now we're actually where we left off last week. Okay. The next part of this course rests too heavily on the earlier part not to require its study. Without this, you will become much too fearful when the unexpected does occur to make constructive use of it. And I believe this is actually in the text somewhere early on. However, as you study the notes, or some close facsimile of this, however, as you study the notes, you will see some of the obvious implications unless you still persist in misusing the defense of mental retardation. I think you could probably put in resistance there too.
Yeah,
So, there's so many just different synonyms that would work, just fighting our real identity. Just whenever we fight ourselves, I think that's why those four italicized words at the beginning of chapter 30 to me just like really set the stage for the rules for decision. Do not fight yourself. And it's like,
yeah,
well, okay, that if I'm finding myself fighting myself, that's when I need to, you know, take five, come back when I'm really truly wanting to decide correctly, and then learn to forgive myself for the resistance.
exactly.
Yeah.
That be still that comes up, and just stop yourself and resist not. And I love.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. I think a lot of when we're reading this, when we're talking, he's talking about mental retardation. Understanding that these were Helen's words.
Hmm.
It wasn't necessarily Jesus was not using these. These were Helen's words out of Helen's experience, because that's what Helen did, was work with. Now, there are so many different varieties of what they just generally back in those days called mental retardation. Uh,
Right, right. Exactly.
and so, today we say, well, that's culture. That's unacceptable. Those words, and they're offensive to people who have like Down syndrome or whatever.
Hmm.
But that's the words that they used in those days. And so Jesus is not, being socially, or, you know,
Politically incorrect.
yeah, politically incorrect. These are Helen's words,
Right,
and
right.
they come from her experience, and I
Hmm.
love that. Even that, that whole thing of, um, I mean, everything. If you really look at it, you can understand that Jesus didn't study Shakespeare, and this is all her words. Anyway, just wanted to point that out in
Yeah,
case people
yeah.
have a problem with those words, mental retardation.
Well, that's actually
Just
oh, go ahead.
go ahead. No, what you're going to say.
Oh, I was just gonna say that whole topic I think is important because a lot of people find the language in the course challenging and or offensive and or troublesome in different ways, and yet that then becomes a classroom, because if I'm resisting uh, on the level of form, it's probably because I'm resisting the content, and that's usually a smoke. Resisting the form is usually a smokescreen for resisting the content, because the content of the course, as Ken Wapnick points out in so many places, is really pure love. It's pure acceptance of the innocence of the undivided oneness that is our real identity, that speaks to us beyond the space-time dream that we're having, and reaches through that illusory experience to part of our mind that knows that there's a truth to what's behind the words. And I think that's why we're drawn to the course, because if we were to pick out any one chapter, or let alone any one section, paragraph, or sentence, or word even, it's like we want the whole song. We don't want just the notes. We want the whole song. We want the meaning behind all the words, and in one awareness. And I think that's why, you know, of course, I think is quoting Plato. Although I searched for it the other day and couldn't find that quote, but I think supposedly Plato said something of, words are but symbols of symbols. Um, but the course does explicitly say that, and I think if we get too hung up in the words and forget it's the meaning behind the words that is not only challenging our egos, but also a real hope. That's really helpful, isn't it? So getting hung up on phrasing and you know correctness and being a grammar Nazi or whatever, which Helen apparently was, and attempted to use that, as what we've been reading points out, as a means of discrediting the voice that she was hearing in her head, in her mind, I should say. But we're all doing that in different ways. We're all basically wrangling and equivocating with the idea that, well, maybe this pure non-dual curriculum is true. And if that's true, then everything I've believed about myself and about the world is bogus. But that could be a really wonderful thing.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And yeah, grammar Nazi or not, there were still grammatical errors. So she could only avoid what she knew. So there we go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, uh, so so uh, so Jesus is basically telling her that it is purposeful. This like feigned ignorance that this doesn't I don't understand what you're saying, or this doesn't make any sense to me. And we're all in that situation where once once I recognized what was being said, I knew that I perfectly well knew it all along, and I couldn't lie to myself about it anymore, although I do try sometimes. But this is it. He's saying you have to really uh, use the equipment that you have,
Mm-hmm.
and use uh, the gifts that you've been given, instead of pretending like you don't. And I mean, really, it's still, uh, I used to be, if I didn't understand something I was reading in the course, this doesn't make sense to me, just go on. And that's what people will tell you, just move on to the next paragraph. He'll say it over and over again.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
even though he does say it over and over again, what I find is when I go back and I look deeply and ask to be shown, and just be open to seeing, I understand every single part of it. There's nothing that is confusing to me about it, which that I how my mind has shifted from how it was, you know 15, 20 years ago. Is I thought I was all that. I thought I had it going, man. I thought I knew. I was on my way. And I look back now, and it's just like looking at myself when I was in kindergarten or something, and me saying, I'm, I'm gonna do everything anyway. Uh,
Well,
so
I think that actually helps with the context of what we're just reading, is that, as you're sharing that, I was thinking, well, I'll probably look back, and maybe you will too, in X number of years, and saying, wow, remember in 2024 when we thought the course meant this, and
yeah,
but that's a good thing. It's basically meaning that, as the course points out, never once does it refer to us as adults, but always as infants or little children, which means we've got a lot of unlearning to do, and a lot of remembering and reminding to reintegrate the awareness that we thought we threw away. The other thing on that phrase, mental retardation, I was thinking, in the context of the environment that you pointed out that Helen worked in, with her specialty was working with children that had what was termed then mental retardation issues. Um, that would have been a very helpful phrase for her to recognize that she did have uh, and probably a very significant part of her mind, a genuine compassion for the people that she was working with those issues. And also, that could have been an excellent way in her particular case to recognize her own resistance and wanting to make differences real, thinking that she had something that was different than what she was, the people she was helping, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
yeah, that does make a lot of sense. And I love it because, you know, that's basically what Jesus is pointing out to her here. You know, you're doing the same thing. You know,
Right.
he's so yeah, I'm sure that stung.
Right.
And
Well, or maybe it stung the ego, and then it also was a boost to her Holy Spirit awareness to realize, oh, yeah, well, that's really what I want to achieve, and what I seem to be doing in the world is just a reflection of healing my own mental retardation, my own resistance, my own foot dragging that says, yeah, maybe that right now I'm just too invested in making a nightmare work or trying to
yeah,
make it work.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
So
So
why don't I reread that sentence and then
okay,
finish
all right.
that paragraph, the next two or three. Okay. However, as you study the notes, you will see some of the obvious implications unless you still persist in misusing the defense of mental retardation. Please remember that its constructive use is hardly a real part of your own real equipment. It is a particularly inappropriate defense as you use it, and I can only urge you to avoid it. So basically, saying, we're using our taking the world and our resistance to the truth as an inner, which we're being suggested that, to look at that as an inappropriate defense can be really helpful. Yeah. The reason why a solid foundation is necessary at this point is because of the highly likely confusion of quote fearful unquote and quote awesome unquote, which most people do make. You will remember that we said once before that awe is inappropriate in connection with the sons of God because you should not experience awe in the presence of your own equals. But it was emphasized that awe is the proper reaction of the soul in the presence of its creator. So far, this course has had only indirect recourse to God and rarely even refers to him directly. I have repeatedly emphasized that awe is not appropriate in connection with me because of our inherent equality. I have been careful to clarify my own role in the atonement without either over or understating it. I have tried to do exactly the same things in connection with yours. The next step, however, does involve the direct approach to God himself. It would be most unwise to start in this step at all without very careful preparation, or awe will surely be confused with fear, and the experience will be more traumatic than beatific. Healing is of God in the end. The means are carefully explained in the notes. Revelation has occasionally shown you the end, but to reach it, the means are needed. Wow. And I think a lot of that really is almost completely reflected in some of the wording in the course. So
Yeah, yeah,
it sounds very familiar.
yeah, it is all very, very familiar. So
Mhm.
yeah, I would say it probably is um, in some form in the course, as a lot of these things are. And I'm noticing as we're going along.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. So I think a lot of the notes then were transcribed and generalized so that it would be applicable to everyone.
All right.
Well, I'll just finish this uh, Ken's commentary here now.
Okay.
At the bottom of page 259. These important words should be read and reread by students of A Course in Miracles as reminders of the need for willingness, diligence, and above all, patience in working with and studying this material. Wow, that's great. Yeah.
So
Gentle, persistent, patience. Huh?
yeah, and humorous. Laugh.
Yes.
There is laughing going on here.
Hmm.
There's no doubt in my mind that Jesus is laughing, and I'm sure Helen laughed about it later. I'm sure, I'm sure Ken, I'm sure everybody laughed about it, and that's the whole point. We all kind of laugh. And that's the whole point here. We have to remember to laugh because he's just pointing out how absurd our situation is. How absurd our situation is here. We think we're helpless. And I love that.
We're
So
like little cartoon characters that have painted ourselves into a corner intentionally and then complain about this our predicament.
yeah, like what's going on? And
Help, Mr.
everything
Wizard.
seems to be coming to an angle in my vision as I'm standing looking in the corner,
Calling all angles.
calling all angles. I love it. Uh, okay, you want me to read on?
Sure.
Okay. Let me switch the microphone. I have to keep remembering. Switch the mic, switch the mic. But it works better that way because then people don't hear all the other noise. Okay. Helen then dictated the first paragraph of the following passage to Bill without any notes. The rest of this section was taken down by Helen and dictated to Bill in the usual way. It is a remarkable message insofar as it is the only place in the dictation where Jesus systematically taught Helen and Bill from their own recent behavior, using it to illustrate the principles he was teaching them in the course. The introduction is even more specific in this regard, and I present the entire passage without interruption. So I'm going to read this, but before I read this, I'm just thinking, you know, even Bill had to think that this was coming from somewhere else. I mean, he couldn't possibly have thought that this was Helen coming up with this. So, that
Yep.
he, he had to have been the most surprised person in the world, really. I cannot imagine having this woman who's, just got such a personality come into him one day and say, "Hey, look, I'm in trouble, and here's here's what I'm hearing." And
And
for him
and
to just go, "Yep, go ahead."
oh, I was gonna and to bring it back to the theme that we've been sharing throughout the year, give or take, if we've been rereading this wonderful book, it's just as much our story of looking at the resistance and overcoming it as it is Helen and Bill's. And so, yeah, Bill probably thought, wow, this is amazing. But haven't we all thought when we really let the ideas behind the course sink in, it's like, oh my gosh, yeah, this is coming really from my right mind, just as it's coming from your right mind. And because our right minds are the same, how could they be different? If pure non-duality says that there's just one of us, then it's coming from our one right mind, ultimately.
Right? Shared. And
Yep.
and and that's why that's why we're equal. That's the equality of the Son of God. We have a shared mind, I mean, honestly, when you start realizing how connected we are, and that's the other thing today's lesson talks about is our connections, how we're connected to everything in the universe. And, that's a really beautiful concept that, you know, takes, once you start recognizing that gratitude is the only really intelligent way of looking at things. Okay, uh, so this is the passage. The following is the only detailed description which need be written down as to how error interferes with preparation. The events specifically referred to here could be any events, nor does their particular influence matter. It is the process which is to be noted here, and not its results. The kind of beliefs and the fallacious premises involved in misthought are as well exemplified here as elsewhere. There is nothing of special interest about the events described below, except their typical nature. If this is a true course in mind training, then the whole value of this section rests only in showing you what not to do. The more constructive emphasis is, of course, on the positive approach. Mind watching would have prevented any of this from occurring and will do so anytime you permit it to. tell Bill that the reason why he was so strained yesterday is because he allowed himself a number of fear-producing attitudes. They were fleeting enough to be more will-o'-the-wisps than serious will errors, but unless he watches this kind of thing, he will find the notes fearful, and knowing him well will distantiate, that is, detach from them. His unprovoked irritation was pardonable, and in brackets, interestingly enough, Helen wrote this as unpardonable, unconsciously revealing her own unforgiveness of Bill, end of brackets. Except, okay, I'm going to read that again. His unprovoked irritation was pardonable, uh, except by himself, and he did not choose to pardon it. You did, but I'm afraid you were under some strain in doing so. This was unfortunate and has weakened your own ability to behave healingly toward Bill at the time, and later also toward Louis, both of whom did act stupidly, quote unquote stupidly, but one quote stupidity unquote at a time is usually enough. You are getting too close to the misuse of mental retardation when quote stupidity unquote sets in all around. Bill, having already weakened himself, was very unmiracle minded. First, by not asking Dee if she wanted a lift in the cab, which was going her way. Even if she didn't want it, she would have been able to use the thought well. There is probably no human error that is more fear-producing, and in parens, in the will/behavior conflict sense, end of parens, than countering any form of error with error. The result can be highly inflammable. By reacting to Dee's quote stupidity unquote with his own, all of the elements which are virtually certain to engender fear have been provided. Bill should note that this is one of the few times that he had to wait for a cab. He thought he took care of it by holding the door of a cab, which did come for that lady, but he was misguided in this belief. And then in parens, beliefs are thoughts and thus come under Christ's guidance, not control, end of parens. Actually, by giving this cab to her, he was very unkind to you. It was quite apparent that you were extremely cold and also very late. The idea that giving her the cab would atone for his previous errors was singularly out of place and well calculated to lead to further error. If instead of attempting to atone on his own, he had asked for guidance, there would have been no difficulty whatever in the cab situation. It was not necessary that anyone wait at all. Bill's original slight to Dee, because of his own need to get home, as he perceived it, stopped him from benefiting from the time-saving device of the miracle. He would have gotten home much quicker if he had taken time to use time properly. You, Helen, were still suffering from strain, see above in parens, and got quite irritated at the girl who stood next to the door on the side which blocked its opening. Her presence there made it necessary each time the door was opened to hold it for a much longer time than was necessary, and you were angry because this made you cold. Actually, the girl was taking care of the younger child who was standing outside, and both of them were really mentally retarded. If you will remember, the older girl asked you very uncertainly about the bus, and you were well aware at the time of her extreme uncertainty. It would have been much wiser had you built up her confidence instead of associating with her stupidity, quote unquote stupidity. This reduced your own efficiency, and the only thing that saved you then was that you did remember in the cab to ask me about the notes, instead of assuming that you were necessarily to arrange to meet the next day and go over them. Bill had already become so misguided that it did not occur to him that his own will, and in brackets, that is his mind's decision-making, into brackets, in parens, which he justified by the contents of the recent notes, a misuse of truth only seemingly on its own behalf, into parens, might be questionable. And then in parentheses, you took 4 notes yourself here because you got mad at him on remembering this. While you did try to will write in the cab, you did not quite succeed. The error is showing up now. End of parentheses.
Wow.
Um,
I know there's more to this, but I just wanted to pause for a moment because
yeah,
there's a
let's just
lot
look
there.
at this because this is a lot.
Yeah. You know what? I mean, to me, it's sort of like the old who's on first? I don't know. But
Uh-huh.
Costello skit. I don't know. There's just so much detail there about the interpersonal interactions and what was going on in Helen and Bill's mind in particular about this sequence of events. And it occurs to me that's like if we really watched our minds with gentle vigilance, with patient scrutiny, and with that calm, uh, peaceful awareness that just noticed every ego thought and nuance, and every little subtle attack and correction, and just see them for what they are. I mean, this is to me, it's like Jesus is given a play by play in slow motion of the attack and an occasional correction of most of this. I don't see a lot of correction in what you just read, but just noticing how all the myriad ways that we try to avoid peace by basically choosing the thought system of sin. And it's really error, and until we proclaim it as okay, now I've committed a crime against perfect oneness. But by default, because we've chosen the ego by default, our errors become sins unless we proactively ask Holy Spirit to, hey, let's look at this together and see, well, maybe I was just afraid of love. And but that repetitive error that then propagates more errors, and this like dominoes of errors falling in multiple dimensions. It's like I just need to keep noticing when I'm not at peace, and then that stops the dominoes, right, just they're frozen in that moment in my mind, metaphorically.
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm getting the story as I'm reading along
Uh-huh.
that, here Helen is standing in the doorway
Hmm.
waiting for a cab, and every time the door opens, it has to stay open longer because there's this girl is standing in there. So, she's standing there freezing and, looking out and seeing Bill giving the cab to somebody else.
Right.
And so and then then they were both apparently running late and uh having having a lot of difficulties because basically he thought he was doing a good thing.
Right.
um and there's a lot of talk of stupidity going on here, which
Yeah.
stupidity basically means that you are in a stupor, that
Right.
you're not conscious of what
Right.
you're doing. So when
Mindless.
you're being stupid, you're not being you're not being just rude or mean or anything. You're just unconscious of what you're doing or why you're doing it.
Do you want to read the
So
footnotes about the stupidity reference?
sure,
Yeah.
let's see
Or
this one
I
here
could read
on.
them. Yeah.
Okay, it's
Uh,
good when you can just click and go there.
yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So on the printed version, footnote 58, which is back a few paragraphs, says here as elsewhere in the section, Jesus's use of the word quote stupid unquote reflects Helen's own judgmental use of it in her attack thoughts. So I think again the word was put in for her benefit, so she could use something that she used as a condemning adjective, and seeing how when she was projecting that onto others, Bill and of course ultimately herself, she was using it as a murderous attack thought, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
okay. And
Oh, and so yeah, so this is cool that we can just look at these footnotes right here too.
yeah,
So
do you want to read the next few?
yeah, and I was just uh what we were saying about that we had read this before in the text here is saying that it's found in the chapter 2 of the published text under fear
Yeah,
and
yeah, it
conflict.
seemed like it was pretty early in the text, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah. Okay, so yeah, and then that I can just go right back to where we were.
Okay.
Okay. Um,
Oh,
so
can I have one more comment? When
sure.
when you're talking about Bill wanting to do good, it kind of flashed on. I was listening to one of Ken's audios this morning while I was out walking, and I was struck with his commentary about how uh, he was sort of half being facetious, but I suppose half not, talking about, just, be careful to watch out for those do-gooders, because if if the people in our lives, including ourselves at times, have this like I'm on a mission from God kind of thing to do good. Guess what God that usually reflects if we're trying to change things in the world. Pay attention to what we're really motivated by, and if it's basically wanting to fix the dream, that often can be motivated by unconscious, unfounded guilt, thinking, well, I really don't think much of myself, and I need to do something that will rectify and redeem the unworthiness that is my self-concept. Um, and so, Ken was again joking, but uh, in one sense not, saying that the Hitlers of the world, and then we could think of plenty more contemporary examples, um, are actually uh, helpful in the sense that at least you know where they're coming from and they're not trying to hide their motivations. Uh, whereas, thinking about politicians that really, have their own hidden agendas, which is what every ego has, of course, is a hidden agenda. Um, that can be a little bit harder to remedy. But when the agenda's out in the open, and when you have uh, an Attila the Hun or a or a Hitler or a figure like that whose intentions are obvious to conquer and dominate the world and rape, loot, pillage, plunder, and whatever, then it's kind of like, okay, well, now you can see where they're coming from, but to have that really going on still, but then disguise it as, oh, I've got this benevolent humanitarian ideal, but yet still running under the ego's murderous malware. It's like, well, I got to keep noticing what the real programming is, right?
Exactly, exactly, exactly. And it's really funny when that politician is really open about exactly this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to, we're going to become basically I'm going to take away all your freedom. That's what I'm going to do. And people are like, well, at least he's being honest, and I admire that honesty. I will vote for honesty. Well,
Well, yeah, that wasn't what I was suggesting.
no, I know
I,
you
I
weren't
was just saying
suggesting
that
that,
when
but it
when
makes you
when
think
we
of that.
when we're looking at which thought system is going on, sometimes it's helpful to to and almost refreshing, I suppose, in a way, to to see when people are upfront about it rather than pretending to be motivated by more altruistic motivations, and yet really just working from the same ego as everyone else. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So let me continue reading
Sure.
here.
Yes, please.
Okay, so uh, let's see. I'm going to go back. Let's see, where he's talking about Helen being cold in the doorway. I'm just going to go back here because I
Okay.
don't want to. You were still suffering from strain, see above, and got quite irritated at the girl who stood next to the door on the side which blocked its opening. Her presence there made it necessary each time the door was opened to hold it for a much longer time than was necessary, and you were angry because this made you cold. Actually, the girl was taking care of the younger child who was standing outside, and both of them were really mentally retarded. If you will remember, the older girl asked you very uncertainly about the bus, and you were well aware at the time of her extreme uncertainty. It would have been much wiser had you built up her confidence instead of associating with her stupidity. This reduced your own efficiency, and the only thing that saved you was that you did remember in the cab to ask me about the notes instead of assuming that you were necessarily to arrange to meet the next day to go over them. Bill had already become so misguided that it did not occur to him that his own will that is his own mind's decision-making, which he justified by the contents of the recent notes, a misuse of truth only seemingly on its own behalf, I'd like to know what that was, might be questionable. And then in parens, you took poor notes yourself here because you got mad at him on remembering this. While you did try to will right in the cab, you did not quite succeed. The error is showing up now. Bill thus, and again, if you're just coming in here, this is Jesus talking directly to Helen, and Helen just saying this as Bill types it up, which is pretty amazing. Bill thus placed himself in a condition to experience a fear rather than a love reaction. And in brackets, Ken says, Helen noted that she was going to write an excellent position instead of a condition, but did not do so. Into brackets. And in parentheses, you were right about the misuse of excellent here, and please do cross it out. You are still angry. An excellent position for this miscreation is not a meaningful approach to the problem. Into parens. It was indeed discourteous. And then in parens again, indeed is not necessary. It was your own error here. I am not saying this with any harsh overtones at all. I am just trying to create better learning conditions for the study periods. We want as little interference as possible for very good reasons. End of parens. Now go back to Bill. He was discourteous when he told you that he wanted to keep the original copy of the notes, having decided to have them Xerox on his own will, and thus justifying it by a very slight misinterpretation of what I said about, quote, useful for others, unquote. Okay, here's the misinterpretation. In fact, if he will reread the actual quote, he will see that it really means, quote, useful for him, unquote. You had interpreted it that way, and frankly, this was pretty clear to me at the time. But this sort of thing happens all the time. It should be noted, however, that the result was not only considerable and totally unnecessary planning on Bill's part, but also a failure to utilize what was intended for him as a help for himself. And before you get too self-satisfied, I would remind you that you do it all the time too.
Talk about a gentle comeuppance, huh? But the whole point is he wants us to come up to his level, right? Rather than
I
to
love it.
wallow in our resistance.
It just cracks me up because I'm just imagining Helen there with Bill typing away and her just spewing these words out like, you did this yourself. Why? You're doing it now and you do it all the time. And, I mean, goodness, that's just cracking me up. So
And we wonder how
Jesus
wars get started, right?
I know.
Not just international, but personal ones, right? And everything in between.
Yep. The unhealed
Intergalactic, I suppose, too.
Yep. So Jesus continues, Bill acted inappropriately toward you by saying that he wanted to be sure that the original was not lost or dirty. It is noticeable that having already decided what he wanted to do, it never occurred to him that it was that it is possible that it is possible that he might lose or dirty them himself, especially as he has not entrusted them to me, capital M me. This is a form of arrogance that he would be much happier without. He should also note that this would probably not have occurred had he not been already literally, quote, off the beam, unquote. Be sure to tell him, she's saying this to him right while he's sitting there typing, be sure to tell him that this pun is to reassure him that I am not angry. If he does not get it or does not like it, I know it is not very good. The reason is that he put me in a position where I can really give him very little at the moment. You want to look at I'm going to look real quick at the footnote here.
Oh, it says the meaning of this pun is unknown to me.
Unknown to me.
Okay, off the beam. Well, maybe it was a Star Trek reference. I don't know.
Yeah, something. I don't think they had Star Trek at that.
Probably not. Yeah.
Yeah, or
I
maybe
th
just starting back
it
in those.
just might, it was about the same era. Yeah, because I remember
Yeah,
having
it
to
really
ask permission to
was.
stay up on Thursday nights to watch it.
Oh man, how funny, how cute.
Yeah.
I just love that. Okay, but I want him to know that I am very well of the exceedingly few times he now makes errors of this kind. He has come a very long way in this respect. It seems a shame that he should allow himself even this much discomfort from it. I suggest that to you that we pray for him, and I pray for your full cooperation in this. This will correct your errors and help him react better to the work on the bookcase, which may otherwise lend itself for misuse by misprojection. There would have been no problem at all about the bookcase, and perhaps even no bookcase, if the solution of the storage problem had been left to me. I have promised to guide you out of problems and will certainly not create them for you. But this means that you do not undertake to solve them yourselves. A storage problem is hardly more difficult for me to solve than a space problem. And see comments under special principles for miracle workers. Okay, that's absolutely true. I love this. I'm kind of going along because we're running out of time here.
Sure.
And I want to finish this because this is so rich. It's
It
amazing.
is. It is. Yeah.
You started well in your attempt to pray with me for Bill, but ended badly. This is because you had already made a number of earlier errors. You were wrong to be pleased with WG's criticism of T and should not have enjoyed WG's description of J's caricaturing of her. You would have laughed with Bill, but not at T. Real courtesy never does this. You should know that all God's children are fully worthy of complete courtesy. You should never join with one at the expense of another.
Mhm.
When you called Bill about joining you, G and A at lunch, you should have waited to ask me. In fact, you should not even have told A that you would call. Then you could have asked Bill first if you would want to come and called A back. It is true that it was better that he came, but this has nothing to do with the real issue. There are ways of treating others in which only consistent courtesy, even in little things, is offered. This is a very healing habit to acquire. Um, this is too much. I think maybe we stop and chat and maybe start this back up in next week because there's just so much. This is just so rich.
It
Jesus.
is, and it occurs to me that this whole section that we must has taken most of today's session is really almost like uh, the transcript or the dialogue from a soap opera, and all the minutia of the interpersonal stuff that um, there's occasionally a mention of a generalized principle, like it right at the end with what you just read. Um, Consistent courtesy, uh, treating others with consistent courtesy, a very healthy habit to acquire. I think that right there is like, well, that belongs in the course, but all the specifics, if somebody had handed me Absence from Felicity and said, this is what the course is about, and I started reading what we just read, I would think, oh my gosh, this is way too specific about people I don't know about and that don't really relate, that I can't relate to. But having built up to this, having read the other half of this book, and now right in the middle of, some very specific instructions meant for Helen and Bill, relating to things that they could relate to, and vicariously, as we're kind of fly on the wall, reading this account, we can kind of see how this was meant for their minds to understand how they were projecting and choosing error instead of correction, and but pointing out all those specific things that can go unnoticed. And I think that's why that gentle vigilance and diligence in watching our mind and just noticing every little niggling, annoying, irritating, upsetting thought that we entertain instead of just letting go, becomes our forgiveness classroom. That's like, okay, I'm still hang on to this. It's the whole thing of, the course doesn't ask us to not have any thoughts that it doesn't say that you shouldn't have impure thoughts. It just says that try not to keep any of them. Try not to hang on to all the craziness that runs through one's mind during the course of a day.
Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
And I mean, it's I what I love about this, what I was just reading here, what I love about this is that yes, Jesus is very specifically telling her about this is what you did, and this is how you did it, and this is why you did it, and this is why you keep doing it, and this is why you're going to do it again if you don't start paying attention and asking for me to help you on all things, asking about, I could have helped you figure out about lunch. I could have helped you figure out about, where to go and what to do. I could have, and this is the personal service that Jesus is offering every single one of us. And, people get confused and they say, well, I'm going to ask Jesus for give me a parking spot, and you can definitely do that. But it's not because he's going to give you a parking spot. It's because he's with you everywhere you go, and he's part of your decision making, and he's part of your desire. Maybe, I'm driving along and I've done this before, and I'm sure you probably have too. Found a great parking spot, found a great parking spot, but then thought, there's somebody who's going to come along here that's going to need this parking spot. I am strong enough, healthy enough, I can walk a ways. I'm going to park, you know, maybe in the least convenient place. And maybe I park in that least convenient place and I get out of my car and I find a $20 bill in the ground. I've had that happen. Absolutely not. I'm like, I didn't get rewarded $20 for, deciding I wanted to park somewhere else so that someone who needed that place could have it. But it just there happened to be a $20 bill there where I happened to decide to go because I decided I wanted to be courteous. That, I mean, anyway, that can be just, we can talk about that all day, how these things happen.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
but it does, I mean, it really is true to me that uh all we have to do is ask to be shown and to allow us to be in God's will, allow us to be in the Holy Spirit's thought pattern, because then we can see um, the right thing to do and we don't make the big mistakes.
Mhm. And oftentimes
So
it's the right thing to think. Um, Not that we're trying to wrangle our minds, but I think just noticing. I love how Ken Wapnick points out this in so many ways, is that the idea of the course isn't to brute force uh, ego out of our mind. It's basically to just to keep watching it and noticing how consistently crazy it is and how much we've avoided looking at it. And if we only look at it now and then, unlike this stream of consciousness account of all these things that were going on in Helen and Bill's minds, that the Holy Spirit was really watching with discernment and clarity, without condemnation, but just seeing how the murderous attacking thought system of the ego always is trying to make error real and reinforce that. But then toward the end, it's like I underline a few things that in the last couple of paragraphs you read. You could have laughed, but with, but not at. All God's children are fully worthy of complete courtesy. Never join with one at the expense of another. Uh, Consistent courtesy is a very healing habit to acquire. Things like that when you pull those out, those are the things that we can generalize, and the course tends to emphasize, because the course is not it's not giving us lots of specific examples, knowing that we have plenty of our own. But I think this is interesting because it sort of complements showing how that part of our mind really can guide us to look at all the specifics, not to make the specifics a real deal and a big deal, but to use them to get back to our right minds, and to generalize and to say, I could use every specific as a way to get back to my right mind. And that's how I walk in gratitude and in love with with
Exactly.
recognizing that I can be grateful for having an awareness in my mind that's able to correct all errors.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And wow, it's such a such a wonderful and that we can't make a mistake. And there aren't any accidents, as Rafi has put in the chat. You
Mhm.
know, we're we are mistake prone because we're ignorant. But we're not so much anymore. We're not wholly insane anymore.
Yeah.
So,
There-
I
there's
have to
since
realize.
well, just
Go
one
ahead.
last thought. That when you said prone to mistakes, I was thinking um, there's another course teacher, just somewhat, who basically I heard her say once that there's just basically forgiveness. Um, I'm going to paraphrase this greatly, but I thought it was a cool quote. It was something like, um, "Enlightenment is a happy accident, but forgiveness makes us more accident prone." Something like that.
Yes. Yes. I love that. I love
Anyway,
that.
yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, well, thank you. I know we're running over a few minutes. I want to just thank you, as always, for sharing this hour with me and everyone else who's joined us. And have a wonderful week. And look forward to the next conversation. And I'm
Great.
always on
Thank you so
ACIM
much.
blog if people want to reach out and connect.
Exactly. ACIMblog.com
Uh-huh.
is Bruce's, and I'm telling you what, that place is a treasure trove. If you want to know about it, anything, you can just go in there. You have got so much material, so many interviews, so much stuff going on. I love